yesteryears of centuries ago, in a small portion of this vast world of ours, there lived a people called the Children of Israel. From them came certain men and women through whom God revealed himself to all mankind. One of these was Gideon, the Liberator. When the people of Israel finally reached the promised land of Canaan, they were confronted with strange idols and heathen gods that were worshipped by the Canaanites. One of the most popular gods was Baal. After the hardships of desert life and the rigorous demands of their own religion, many of the Israelites began to be attracted to Baal worship, with its gaiety, feasts, and sensuous reveling. But when the people began to turn away from the Lord God and his ways of righteousness, trouble began to befall them. For one thing, Midianite robbers invaded Israel and plundered their homes and land. Many of the Israelites fled to the surrounding hills and hid in caves, trying to escape the ravages of the invaders. Then the Lord sent a prophet to the people of Israel to remind them that they had brought all this trouble on themselves.
Thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt and brought you out of the place where you were slaves. I freed you from the Egyptians and from all your enemies. And I drove out the people ahead of you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose country you are living. But you have not obeyed the Lord.
One day, shortly after that, a man of Israel by the name of Gideon was threshing some wheat. By the Midianites and having his grain stolen, he was beating out the kernels of wheat in his winepress instead of on the threshing floor. While Gideon was working, the angel of the Lord came and sat under a tree nearby.
The Lord is with you, you mighty man of courage.
Gideon turned to face his visitor.
If the Lord is really with us, why then has all this happened to us? For now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of the Midianites.
Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you, am I not?
Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least important in my family.
But I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites.
If you are really pleased with me, then give me a proof that you are really speaking to me. Don't leave, I beg you, until I come back and bring you an offering.
I will stay until you return.
So Gideon prepared some food and took it out to the angel and offered it to him. The angel told Gideon, "Take the meat and the bread and lay them on that rock." Then the angel of the Lord reached out his staff and touched the meat and the bread. Instantly, a blaze of fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the food. Suddenly, the angel of the Lord was gone. Gideon was frightened. "O Lord," he said, "I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord reassured him, "It is well with you. Do not fear. You will not die." That night, the Lord spoke to Gideon again, commanding him to tear down the altar of Baal, which was on his father's land, and there to build another altar where the people might worship the Lord God. The next morning, when the people saw how Gideon had destroyed the altar and the idol, they went to Joash, Gideon's father, and demanded, "Bring out your son. He must die because he has torn down the altar of Baal." But Gideon's father knew in his heart that his son had done what was right, and so he spoke out in defense of Gideon and against Baal.
"Are you fighting for Baal? Are you going to save him? Whoever fights for Baal, let him be put to death. If Baal is a god, let him fight for himself, because his altar has been torn down."
The words of Joash rang true, and the people were convinced. Gideon was left free to work out a plan that would drive the army of Midianites out of Canaan. But there were so many of them, it seemed like an impossible task. Then the Spirit of the Lord took hold of him. Gideon sent messengers throughout Israel to gather an army to fight the Midianites. As Gideon waited for the men to gather, he prayed to the Lord, asking for proof that he was the man to lead Israel in battle.
If you really are going to use me to save Israel, as you said, then give me a proof. I will lay a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If dew falls only on the fleece and the ground all around it is dry, then I'll know that you will save Israel by me, as you have said.
Early the next morning, Gideon went to the fleece and squeezed it. It was drenched with dew, although the ground around it was dry. Again, Gideon prayed.
Don't be angry with me, O Lord, if I ask for one more thing. Please let me make another test with the fleece. Let it be dry only on the fleece, and let there be dew all over the ground.
Early in the morning, Gideon went out to look at the fleece again. Although the ground all around was wet with dew, the fleece was dry. Now Gideon was convinced that God meant for him to drive the Midianites out of Canaan. 32,000 men answered Gideon's call to arms. But God told Gideon this was too many. 22,000 who admitted they were afraid were sent home. But God said there were still too many. The remaining soldiers were taken to a spring to get a drink. God told Gideon to watch for the men who cupped the water up with their hands and then lapped it as a dog does. There were 300 men who drank this way. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "With these 300, I will give you the victory. Send all the others home." That night, Gideon and one of his men crept cautiously into the camp of the Midianites. They stopped outside one of the Midianite tents and listened to some soldiers talking inside. It was a strange conversation, but it gave Gideon the reassurance that he needed.
I had a dream. A cake of barley bread rolled into the camp of Midian. It struck a tent and turned it upside down, so that the tent laid flat.
That means the sword of Gideon, a man of Israel. Into his hands, God's given the whole camp of Midian.
Coming back to the camp of Israel, Gideon prepared his 300 men for battle in a very strange way. He gave each man a horn, a lighted torch, and a jar in which to hide the torch. Then he told his men, "Watch me. When I come to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I blow the horn, all of you blow your horns around the camp and shout, 'For the Lord and for Gideon.'" While the Midianites were still sleeping, Gideon and his soldiers quietly surrounded the Midianite camp. They were careful to keep their lighted torches covered with jars so they would not be detected. All was quiet. Then Gideon blew his horn. The men blew their horns, smashed their jars, and holding up their torches, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon! For the Lord and for Gideon!" The Midianites thought they were surrounded by a great army, and those that were not killed in the confusion fled into the darkness. The Lord gave Gideon one victory after another. When there was peace again, the men of Israel came to Gideon to make him their king.
"Rule over us, you, and then your son, and your grandson after you, for you have saved us from the Midianites."
But Gideon knew that it was only because of the Lord's help that he had won his victories, and that the Lord was really ruling his people. Gideon tried to explain this to them.
I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord is ruling over you.
Gideon had led the people of Israel in winning many battles, but even more important, He had led Israel back to the Lord God and his ways of right living.